Hi, welcome to this installment of our Adult Education webinar series. I'm Danielle, and I'm an Adult Education Specialist at the Utah State Board of Education, and today we're going to be talking about the ELP Standards, which are the English Language Proficiency Standards for Adult Education. And so to start off with, I want to just give a little bit of history and some context about where these came from. So back in 2009, there was a movement that updated to the Common Core state standards across the K-12 system. A couple of years later, the College and Career Readiness Standards for Adult Education were developed. That is kind of a condensed subset of the College and Career, or of the Common Core state standards. Along with that were updated level descriptors to go along with the College and Career Readiness Standards on the ABE side of our adult education programs. And then the ELP standards were developed to provide some additional support and scaffolds to help English language providers help students access those college and career readiness standards. The NRS level descriptors for ESL were also updated as a follow-up to having new standards, and assessments go along with that as well. So we recently had some updated assessments to align with the standards on the ABE side. That's the TABE 1112 and the CASA Schools series are those that are currently approved for use. And on the ELP side, we're anticipating that we will see newly aligned assessments over the coming year. So one question is, why do we need these separate standards for English language proficiency? Why not just use the College and Career Readiness Standards for Adult Education? And under WIOA, we have a challenge as we're working with English language acquisition programs. We not only have to support our ELL students in becoming skilled in the acquisition of the English language. They have to read, write, speak, comprehend, but they also need to have a pathway to where they can obtain a high school diploma or its recognized equivalent. And we have a call to support students as they transition into further education, training, or employment. So the challenge is greater than what it has been in the past. And additionally, ELLs make up for about 45% of the students nationwide in adult education programs. Here in Utah, it's just slightly under that. But it's a large part of what adult education programs do nationally. And so we want to make sure that we're providing the supports and the scaffolds for that population of students. So a little bit of context, just so that we know going in what the design parameters were around these standards. They are intended to support a learner's English language acquisition and to help them access the college and career readiness standards. They're not meant to be used in place of the college and career readiness standards, but rather as a scaffold and a support. There are 10 standards, but they're not in any order of hierarchy or importance, and so there's not any specific order in which they should be taught. Additionally, the standards are not a curriculum. They don't tell teachers how or what they should teach. They just provide the language knowledge that students need, and then the teachers have a lot of flexibility within those guidelines to figure out how they're going to help students get to those benchmarks. And additionally, this is not an exhaustive list of what can be taught, but some guidelines as far as what proficiencies a student should have as they're moving on to the next levels of English language proficiency. So with that, here are the ELP standards for adult education. Number one is an ELL student can construct meaning from oral presentations and literary and informational text through level-appropriate listening, reading, and viewing. 2, an ELL student can participate in level-appropriate oral and written exchanges of information, ideas, and analyses in various social and academic contexts, responding to peer, audience, or reader comments and questions. 3, an ELL student can speak and write about level-appropriate complex literary and informational texts and topics. 4, an ELL student can construct level-appropriate oral and written claims and support them with reasoning and evidence. 5, an ELL student can conduct research and evaluate and communicate findings to answer questions or solve problems. 6, an ELL student can analyze and critique the arguments of others orally and in writing. 7, an ELL student can adapt language choices to purpose, task, and audience when speaking and writing. 8, An ELL student can determine the meaning of words and phrases in oral presentations and literary and informational text. 9, an ELL student can create clear and coherent level-appropriate speech and text. And 10, an ELL student can demonstrate command of conventions of standard English to communicate in level-appropriate speaking and writing. And that is it. There are only 10, and as you can see, they are very broad. And so that's something that I really like about these English language proficiency standards, is that they set some parameters so that you can see what are the different tasks that I need to help students access. But then as a teacher, you have a lot of wiggle room as far as figuring out what that looks like in your own classroom. So to give you a little bit more detail about what specifically that would look like at each different level, each of those standards has a level descriptor that accompanies it. Those level descriptors detail what the student performance targets would look like at each level as demonstrated by learners. So let me give you an example of what those look like. Here is a level descriptor for ELP Standard 1. So this was the standard about constructing meaning from oral presentations. So you can see at level 1, a student would be able to use a limited set of strategies to identify a few keywords or phrases in oral communication. But by the time they are exiting level 5, a student would be able to use a wide range of strategies to not only identify keywords, but determine central ideas and themes, analyze the development of those themes, cite evidence from the text, and be able to create a summary. And so as you're working with students from beginning, intermediate, and advanced levels, you can see how you would build in through that level. When you get into the booklet, the actual ELP Standards book, there's 2 different views that are presented when you get into the level descriptors. This is an example of view 1, and the design behind view 1 was when your focus is English language acquisition instruction. So you start with the ELP standard, you have your level 1 through 5 descriptors there, and your correspondences to the college and career readiness standards, both in the mathematical practices and the English language arts, are listed below as a reference. View 2 is more useful when you are the ABE instructor and you're designing your lesson planning around the college and career readiness standards, but you want to know what to expect of your English language students and how to provide scaffolds for those students. So the booklet itself actually presents each of these standards in the 2 different formats, and you can pick and choose which of those different formats makes more sense for you as an instructor. Another way of organizing those standards is to look at the different modalities that they require of the students. So when you look at the NRS level descriptors, which would be those that the NRS assessments are going to be designed around to describe what a student can do at ELL level 1 through 6, you'll see that those are organized into 3 different modalities. So interpretive skills, I would say, are those that a student is taking in information. So primarily listening and reading. Productive skills are those where they are creating information, they're putting things out into the world, so speaking and writing activities. And then interactive are those that require students to process information and think critically about it and be able to both take in information and create new information. One of the better examples that I've seen that I wanted to share came from a colleague that I met at the Mountain Plains Adult Education Association conference recently. His name was David Rawlings, and he's at the Santa Fe Community College. So he and his team took those 10 standards and culled them down to a couple of keywords, which you see listed there as a translation. So looking at just a couple of keywords for each of the 10 standards, and then which of the different modalities are represented by each. And then they went on to do a second activity that where they brainstormed some different learning practices that you could do with students to help facilitate proficiency in each of those 10 standards. And I wanted to share that so that you could see some different ideas of scaffolding or learning strategies and activities that you could use in your classrooms. And I would be happy to share the slide deck as well. I will link to it on our YouTube page so that you can pull up these different slides and have access to this resource. Ultimately, the message of these English language proficiency standards is that we need to ramp up the level of rigor within ELL programs nationally. It's no longer enough to just provide language acquisition strategies. We have to give students opportunities to ramp up their academic language, both in exposing them to complex texts and helping them access challenging reading materials, as well as giving them the opportunity to develop a more formal register and to speak and write more formally, and giving them opportunities to think critically and to be able to analyze information. And so that there's really a challenge that's being set out to the field by these English language proficiency standards. And one of the reasons for that is that the new standards are really challenging students to complete ESL at a higher level than what we've seen before. I like this graphic because I think historically we've thought about the 12 NRS levels as being fairly linear. You would go through ELL level 1 through 6 and then transition into ABE 1 through 6. And in this graphic you can see that students who are completing ELL level 6 would be able to transition into high school level courses. And that's not the experience that I've seen as we've worked with different adult education programs. So what we may see is that students are having to stay in ELL courses longer before we're transitioning them into ABE. And we may need to see more blending of our ABE and ESL levels as well. And this next graphic is just the same information, but another view that's been provided by CASAS, so that you can see the different EFL levels, that's ELL 1 through 6, and the corresponding college and career readiness level. So you can see that a student who is completing ELL 3, that high beginning ELL level, would really need to be on par with accessing beginning literacy ABE levels, so being able to speak and write at about a second grade level as they're exiting that high beginning level. And that's a higher challenge than what we have previously seen. But it's doable, and I also wanted to share one of the tools that's provided in the ELP Standards booklet that gives some ideas of some different supports and scaffolding that you can use with students depending on their different level. A lot of these are teaching strategies that you should be very familiar with and are probably already using, but it just gives you a chance to think about what strategies would be appropriate at the different levels. This was really a very brief introduction to those ELP standards. If you would like to do some additional training, Links is an adult education professional development website. It's links.ed.gov. And they have 3 training modules that are online that dig deeper into the ELP standards specifically. It takes 20 to 30 minutes to go through each of those 3 modules. And then they also have 3 resource collections under what they call ESL Pro. And each of those resource collections includes an issue brief, a companion learning resource, an online course that you can go through independently, and open education resources. So those 3 different resource collections, the first is called Meeting the Needs of Today's English Language Learner, and it focuses on ramping up the level of academic rigor in English language instruction. The second is Integrating Digital Literacy into English language instruction, and the third is Preparing English Learners for Work and Career Pathways. All of them are really fantastic resources, but for any English language acquisition instructor, I would highly recommend going through the Meeting the Needs of Today's English Language Learner online module, because it's got some really fantastic resources, lesson plans, ideas. There's videos where you can observe other teachers providing instruction. And it's been really helpful to those teachers that I know that have gone through that course. So I would encourage everybody to actually pull up the standards document and dive into each of those 10 standards and look at them specifically, look at those different level descriptors, and figure out what you can do to greater incorporate the standards into your daily instruction. You can find the full document on our website, which is schools.utah.gov/adult education, or through links, which is just links.ed.gov, and then searching the English Language Proficiency Standards. You can also just Google it. If you do English Language Proficiency Standards for Adult Education, it's the first thing that's going to come up. So I hope that that was helpful and that you have an opportunity to really dive into those standards. I would love to talk more about how I can support you in your different adult education programs throughout the state of Utah, so feel free to reach out and contact me. You've got my email there. And that is it for today. Thanks.